at this meeting. I did not hear from Peter, so he may lend out attending. And then Jen, I assume John Hallen is not available. Is that correct?
Right, he's off today.
Oh, it's okay. Great. And Carolyn, thank you for joining us.
Sure.
So we have two topics on the agenda. The first is residential access regulations, which is the combined version that Tom circulated and I forwarded to the group earlier. And then the second is discussion of the comprehensive zoning bylaw redraft and reorganization. Just so everybody is aware, there was a planning board meeting last night. I think you guys were talking about it in advance, but just so that everybody's on the same page, at the end of the meeting, there was some robust discussion around sort of how the planning board was going to work going forward, whether majority views were going to take priority or whether minority views and dissent were an important part of the process. I think there's more to be discussed on that from the planning board itself. But to be honest, I think at some point that issue needs to be worked out before we jump too deep into the comprehensive zoning bylaw redraft and reorganization. And I'll just sort of lay out how I personally feel about it, is that with a split planning board, it's going to be very difficult to move forward with the comprehensive redraft in a way that I think is productive for this working group, but also the community. That's just how I feel personally. But we are being asked next Tuesday night to join the select board, the planning board, the ZBA, and the master plan implementation committee to talk about the comprehensive redraft. Lauren is planning on providing an overview of what processes have looked like in other communities and sort of lay out what our options are along the lines of what Carolyn reflected to us back in September, so that all members of all relevant boards are up to speed on that. Lauren has also asked that our working group provide a quick overview of the work that we've done over the last 15 months, which I think will be good for everybody to see and understand the scope of what we've worked on. And I'm happy to take a crack at that. And then it'll be opened into a public discussion with the boards around what do we want the goals of our process to look like. And we'll see where it heads from there. It will definitely be it'll be an important meeting for all of us to attend. I honestly don't know if we're going to be able to conclude Tuesday's night's meeting in a neat little bow. My guess is that we're going to have to take all of this information and reflect on it and perhaps reflect back to the same group, some thoughts around process. But from where I sit today, the thing that I'm struggling the most with is how to move forward when the planning board unfortunately is split 3-3. So that's my biggest personal concern, but I'm willing to go forward one more step in this process and see if we can get to a better place on Tuesday night.
Was there any progress made in terms of protocols or procedures? I mean, the way the planning board should function, or couldn't they even get there?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think we're 3-3. I think we're 3-1 with one unknown amongst our voting members, because the unknown was he had to leave the meeting early. Yes, we talked about setting up a third meeting every month so that we have just time to talk about stuff other than having to deal with permits. I made a pledge to them last night that I try to be more give them more information about what we're doing. I mean, we regularly do liaison reports, and Paul and I tell them what we are doing, but it's at the end of the meeting. Attention spans are short. Nobody shows any great interest to ask questions or anything, and then they get upset when we show up with a proposal, and say, oh, we didn't have enough notice. But we're going to try to do a better job in that. But, I have to ask this board to allow me to give them more information, even though it gets out into the public, and, it may be things that are in the draft form. But I think, for going forward, to deal with my board, we have to we have to disclose everything we're thinking about, even if it's a draft, even if it's an idea, even if it's not going to happen. I think they, they need, and the community will certainly need to understand our thought processes. So,
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Carolyn in terms of her experience. I've got to say that my observation over the last month or two dealing with the planning board would make, if that behavior continues, would make participating in our little group impossible for me. I'd have to resign. I couldn't tolerate that kind of not just nitpicking, but a return to what's been discussed and meeting after meeting. It's not productive. But Carolyn, what do you suggest goes on? I don't think many of us are going to stay the course if this continues.
Well, I can certainly appreciate that, because to say that it was disheartening is sort of an understatement. And not that this provides much consolation, but this is what I see every town go through when they're doing a real major rewrite. There's always the fractioning of the interests out there. I think, though, to Tom's comment, I know, Katie, it looks like it might be a 3-3 planning board, but when it comes to zoning amendments, it's only the permanent members that really have a right to vote. The others may weigh in as to their feelings about it, but the vote, though, the recommendation of the board is going to be just as reflected through the permanent members. So I think actually your zoning amendments, putting aside the discussion last night, but the zoning amendments themselves were approved 4-1, right?
Yeah.
4-1
that's
and 5-0, at least on the two small ones. Yeah.
okay. So I would take that as a victory, as opposed to looking at some of the the outside conversation that's gone on, or what does this mean for the bigger project. But going to the floor of town meeting, even if it was a 3-2 vote, you're going to face opposition at town meeting anyway. You might even face opposition with the Finance and Advisory Committee or a select board or whomever. There are going to be those who raise questions, or maybe might have done it slightly differently if they were sitting on this board. But I would take the votes, at least going into this December town meeting, I would go full steam ahead. And yes, there are going to be some folks who, there's going to be, I would imagine there's going to be some robust discussion at town meeting. But at the end of the day, let's all back up and better than I do, because I certainly don't know, how did you all get to be here? The master plan was certainly something the town supported. The master plan implementation committee, is then takes the document and tries to make it real. And then this zoning bylaw working group is an offshoot of that. You've done an awful lot of work. And I have to say that despite some of the criticism from where I sit, you've done a lot more work than I have seen other communities do. So I wouldn't get dragged down too much by the opposition. What's really going to matter is what overall does the town want you to do, and who shows up at town meeting, and how does town meeting vote? Town meeting may look at a 4-1, or maybe some of these comprehensive zoning bylaw rewrites. Maybe it does result in a 3-2 vote of the planning board. Who knows? But if you've got this feedback and this sense of what town meeting is interested, the issues that town meeting is interested in addressing, I think you've got that interest and momentum on your side to overcome some of those naysayers. There are always going to be the folks that say, yeah, well, it's broken, but this isn't the way to fix it. Well, tell us how you would fix it then. And I'm not so sure we'll ever find two people who agree on how to fix it. But let's at least bring something forward, would be my suggestion. Bring something forward. It may not be perfect. It may not even be something that every single one of you like every aspect of, because it's all about compromise. But bring it forward, see what the town wants to do with it, as opposed to just saying, I throw my hands up and walk away, because this just doesn't look like we're going to get the support of the boards that we'd hoped it would. I'd encourage you to carry on.
Okay.
I
Jen?
may.
Yeah.
So I did get a call from another member today and I spent, and it's not, I mean, we communicate with all of our members to keep everybody, if anybody calls, Lauren and I talked to them and I talked to him for 30 minutes. It was more one-sided. I more listened, but, and it wasn't Clark, so we can put it together. So my point was, I did exactly what Carolyn said. I said, this is not a committee that came out of the sky. This is a committee that is been drafted by the select board, that has been given the work to do out of the master plan and implementation committee. And the master plan came out of years of work and communication. So we really can't, we have to hold strong on that this was really vetted and asked for. And as Tom is saying, the planning board has so much work to do, but if you look back 15 years, you're not going to see a lot of zoning work done, except for what was brought forward and when it was necessary to fix something or bring in a new bylaw like the zone. And look at what it was. It's something that we don't even get to use as well as we could, which is a large house review. So I just tried to encourage this member that this has not been in darkness like it was being applied. I said, these are public meetings, and yes, they're during the day, and that's tough, but it's recorded, it's posted, there's minutes, and we've been given a very clear direction of what we've been asked to do. And I went on to say, and the large rewrite will be very public, and in other communities, it is done by third parties, council, and everybody has a say, and we're 50 years behind. And, it seemed to give a little traction on that, but I agree with Tom, with probably need more meetings, and the updates needed to be at the beginning of the meetings, because every effort was given, particularly by Tom, trying to update them on changes we were making all along. So.
Thank you, Jen. And I know you've been through this in Situate too. So you've seen the arc of the fracturing, and then perhaps the healing, and then perhaps the jettisoning of some of the ideas. And so I appreciate both your comments on that front. I do think that in some ways, this meeting on Tuesday, as ill-timed as it feels, it's also probably the perfect time in the other sense to try and at least get everybody's views on the table, so that we can actually have as close to a process or single point of view for how to move forward. And then, as Woody said, I think we all have to sort of think from our own perspective if we want to sign up for that one last time before we sign the deadline. Tom, go ahead.
This meeting Tuesday seems to have come out of the blue. Who's driving it and why? I'm just curious. I think it's a good idea. I'm sorry, where did it come from?
I thought it was Chris Senior is what, Katie, is that right? The meeting on the 9th?
It is. So what, and I sort of, if you remember back in late May or June, I brought to you guys a draft of the the select board's fiscal 2002 goals. They had 3 of them: communication, capital planning, and then comprehensive zoning bylaw rewrite. And at the time, in my mind, I was like, great, we've got a master plan implementation committee on board, we've got a working group, we've got a planning board that's supportive, because we had just presented to them our housing recommendations. And now we have a select board that is signed on as their goal to support comprehensive zoning redraft. And that's where we were in May. So flash forward to the fall, Chris is getting asked by his board to keep on working on the 3 goals. And as a result, he called the meeting for next Tuesday, the 9th, to kind of bring together all the boards in order to move his board, the select board's goal number 2 forward, in terms of trying to put some process and put some timeline behind the comprehensive redraft. Also operating in the background is the fact that we are making the request at special town meeting for funding for a consultant. And so in Chris's mind, it was sort of perfect timing to not only advance the select board's goal by having a joint meeting, but also garner support, hopefully from all of the boards, for funding the comprehensive redraft at special town meeting. So it's Chris's request and the select board's request to have this meeting.
That's fine. I think it's a great idea. I'm just curious as to how it came about. That's all.
Yeah, and to be honest, Lauren told me about this, I think it was the Thursday after the public hearing, and then we went into storm mode last week, and I honestly thought it was going to be canceled, and then lo and behold, we're still doing it. So there we are. It's all it. In some ways, it'll be a conversation. So I guess just to kind of close that out, so first off, if everyone can mark their calendars for Tuesday, the 9th, is an 8 o'clock start to the meeting because the select board has to vote on some warrant articles that are remaining. Then they are going to talk about town hall at 7 o'clock, and then they're talking to us and the other boards about zoning at 8. My understanding is it's going to be a hybrid meeting that for those of you that are comfortable, I believe there's going to be in person at Wilcott Commons. For those of you that are not or unable to attend in person, my understanding they're going to attempt to also have it via Zoom. So stay tuned on how the meeting logistics work. I think I'm going to mask up and go to Wilcott, but that's my personal choice, and I don't expect anybody else to do anything they're uncomfortable with. But it is going to be a test of getting back to masked in-person meetings.
Now, it's a public meeting, but the chairs of permitting boards are what, kind of sitting as a quasi committee, and then the audience will be interested citizens, or what?
So my understanding is that it's being posted as full boards, the
Full boards.
Yes,
Okay.
full ZBA, full master plan implementation, full planning, and full select board, then public Woody. So
Okay.
That's a big meeting.
it is a big meeting.
Huge.
It's huge. From the master plan implementation committee, I don't expect anybody but perhaps Cassie and myself and Tim Davis to attend. I don't think we'll get full attendance from the 8 on master plan implementation. Hopefully majority of planning will be there. Woody, you can see who from your board is available. And then all of the select board will be there.
Okay.
Okay. And again, as it was laid out to me just a little bit ago by Lauren, the way the meeting is currently being structured is part 1 is going to be an overview of what a comprehensive zoning redraft process looks like in other communities using benchmarking and best practices. Then part 2 is going to be an overview of the zoning bylaw working group's work that's been completed to date, kind of the sweep of what topics have we covered, what research have we done, what recommendations have we made, and then it'll open into a discussion. So that is my understanding of the agenda as it stands. And as soon as I get the agenda, I'll circulate it to everybody. Lauren, it's going to be posted today. So Woody, I'll get it to you so that you can forward it to your ZBA. I'm going to do the same to master plan, and Amy will do the same for planning. But that is comprehensive zoning bylaw redraft and reorganization as it stands right now. The topic that we have Carolyn here for is actually a discussion of the residential access regulations. And we have reviewed this, I believe, if not 2, maybe 3 times in various states, dating back as early as like August. And at the time, we had reviewed just the common driveways, then we reviewed common driveways plus a separate set of regulations for non-subdivision private ways. And then Tom combined them into a single set of regulations, which is non-subdivision ways plus common driveways. And then after we sort of fine-tuned the definitions that are going forward to special town meeting, Tom further updated it to make sure that the regulations reflect the definitional changes. And the only other thing I just wanted to remind the group is that when we started this process back in August, we actually had Tom and I had a meeting with Brian Joyce and with Lauren, and I think that was it. Maybe Jason Federico was in that meeting. I can't remember at this point, where we sort of talked about, if we were going to make changes to common driveways, or if we were going to regulate private ways, non-subdivision private ways, from a DPW or from a town engineering perspective, what would we need to take into consideration? And the two big pieces of input that we heard from Brian Joyce that I remember were, one, that when it came to common driveways, having three different links and widths related to common driveways didn't make sense. His recommendation was choose what's the standard for the middle and make it apply to all common driveways. It's just too complex for what it is. The other comment that he made was that because the town as a whole is subject to stormwater regulations, his strong recommendation was that for both common driveways and non-subdivision ways, that we put in compliance with what he referred to as the NIPSDs, which is the National Pollution Discharge and Emission System, and the Municipal Stormwater System, MS4 standards. My takeaway from that conversation was that the town as a whole is being held to that standard. So going forward, it made sense to have both common driveways and private ways, to the extent they were being upgraded, be held to those same stormwater standards. So that was, I think those are sort of the two major comments we heard from him in those discussions. So with that, Tom, I'll hand it to you because you've really been the mastermind behind this. And Carolyn, we've asked you to attend so that you can sanity check, in particular when it comes to section 5, if we're headed anywhere astray in terms of our ability to require upgrades of ways for the applicant. So that's really one of the pressing questions.
Katie, can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I thought that, and Carolyn probably knows the answer, or Tom, but I thought that NIPDs was usually triggered based on the amount of acreage that you were disrupting or the amount of square footage that you were building. I can't remember what it is, but so are you suggesting that regardless of square footage or regardless of acreage, that anyone that is to build on a common driveway would have to go through NIPDs? I'm just trying to clarify that.
I don't think I'm not suggesting that we overrule what are the regulations, but rather if a common driveway or if a non-public way trips NIPSDs, then it applies, versus today we're silent on it. We have no standards. Does that make sense?
Like, how is someone circumventing that now?
I don't know that they are. I think Brian suggested it, though, that we mention it. If we had not, I don't have the current draft of the regulations in front of me. I think he's just saying it was something good to add, and I'm presuming he knows what he's talking about. And when he's making the recommendation, we add it for this particular regulation.
Okay.
I'm not an expert in NIPDs, so I have to defer to him on this one. So
I think his point was that our current common driveways is silent on it because it predates NIPDs. And so we should be proactive in including it versus remaining silent on it when
I will, yeah, and I'll invite him to our hearing on this so that he can, to the extent that question comes up again, he can explain this for us. But we are relying on his expertise in this matter. So
NIPDs, it's NPDES, Paul. It's NIPD, it's National Discharge. I forget what
National Pollution Discharge something.
Yeah.
elimination system.
So usually, so like a subdivision that I'm working on right now, we have to file a SWIP, an SWPPP, and a NIPDs. It has to be reviewed locally and then to the state. So I thought that there was a threshold of either based on acreage that you disturb. So it was a requirement. But yeah, I mean, I think the more the better of what's required in the bylaws is, transparent and helpful. I just wanted to clarify that was just a little.
And I mean, I think his objective is to have, as much as we possibly can, have state-of-the-art drainage systems, anytime we're building a road or a driveway.
Yeah, I think you're supposed to based on the amount of acreage that you disturb. But I think full transparency and adding it to the bylaw wouldn't hurt.
All right. So,
Yeah.
All right.
do you want to put this up on the screen?
Yeah, I can put it up on the screen. Hold on.
I'm
You should be all set.
not an expert on the shared screen process. Where did I can't see it.
Hold on one sec. I'm doing it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
11:04. I'm just I have
I
multiple.
don't mean to be impatient, but time is money.
I know. And it's also our sanity.
Yeah.
All right, there we go.
So again, this started from amendments we were doing to our existing common driveway regulations, and then taking the Plymouth bylaw that deals with non-subdivision control roads and turning that into a regulation and combining the two. This introduction, I believe, is highly written by Katie, but Katie and I collaborated on that, and just it explains very clearly what the purpose of this regulation is. I believe the common driveway one at the moment has a similar type of explanation in front of it. It's if I recall correctly, the current common driveway one has 12, 13, 14 sections to it, so it's pretty comprehensive as well. So we're not doing something that's intimidating here compared to what we already have. All right, so section 2, what's 2? Can you scroll down?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I've got just a couple of issues with 2. When you
Okay.
get-
Well, I can't even see it right now, so.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I had one comment on 1. Tom, I think that maybe we start the first paragraph with just a simple statement around the Zoning Act of 75, giving planning boards and municipalities the right under zoning regulations to lessen congestion on the streets and conserve the health and safety. I think, again, tying this back to the state framework of your board's ability to regulate is important.
Do you want to draft that?
Yeah, I'm happy to draft a sentence and send it to you.
Okay. All
Could I
right,
also ask where the 20% number comes from?
The master plan.
Okay, because the majority of roads in Cohasset or ways in Cohasset are private, but they may be the majority, but they're the minority in terms of linear mileage. Okay,
There's a map, and it was actually in.
I've seen the map,
Yes.
but I
Yeah.
haven't seen the.
And the red lights up the maps. There's a lot of red on there,
Yeah,
which I think is the private ways, right?
I find it hard to, I don't want to drag it down now. It's kind of unbelievable statistic to me.
what, there's only 20%?
Yeah, when a majority of these ways are private.
Okay. I mean, it's directly from the master plan. If
All right, no, I don't want to tie us down now. It's a number that
yeah,
if we need to, we can verify it, but that's
Yeah.
all.
I think actually, Tom, my suggestion is this, like, I'm not sure it adds that much to the preamble, so we can actually strike the sentence and just say the high number of private roads throughout town has created unique challenges and leave it at that.
Yeah.
So let's strike that second sentence so we don't get
Okay.
into confusing, and I'll draft that sentence and send it to you. Okay, so now scrolling down to 2.
All right, so number 2 is intended to, similar to what was set out in the new proposed bylaw, is to set out what are the ways you access properties in town. I added in the red, you see references to defined as in the bylaw. The fourth bullet, I added that the other day and looking over what we were putting in the definition. So that's all number 2 is intended to do, is just clearly identify the 4 means of access to a residential lot. Woody, you had a comment on this?
Well, my first comment was the absence of bullet 4, so you've taken that one. I'm unfamiliar with chapter 325. I don't know whether it's important to have a brief synopsis here.
That's our
Laziness, I mean, I should have gone to the town
Yeah,
bylaws.
that's our
Okay.
subdivision, that's the subdivision control.
Okay, because without that 4th bullet, it was reading very much like a subdivision oriented thing. Anyway, I just have a question. I certainly agree with the 4 bullets. These are the legal or the approved ways of access, but of course, to be literal about it, a lot of residential properties in the town follow private ways that have no that are not created as subdivisions, that are not approved by the planning board. I mean, that's the 5th actual means of access, although it may not be the qualified or legal way to.
Well,
I don't know if anybody's going to make a point on
Yeah,
that one.
I think for the future, though, we are trying to,
Oh, sure.
going forward, defining what the means of access are and narrowing it down to whatever kind of polyglot mess we have today.
Or ought to be, or some word like that. Yes, these
Yeah.
are, there's a missing bullet 5 that's just a non-conforming, don't put it in, but a
Yeah.
non-conforming way, privately non-conforming way. Don't worry about it. Somebody's going to bring it up, maybe, that's all.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is it possible that there are any pre-subdivision control law ways out there that were created before the subdivision control law came into effect that have been accepted as town ways?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah, there
Okay.
are, there was, I mean, as public ways?
Yeah, as a town road, yes, accepted as a town road.
Yeah, and we have that list. So what
Okay,
what we know definitively, Carolyn, are our public ways. There is a list that was updated, I think as recently as 2016, that lists all of the public ways and documents when they were voted at town meeting. What we don't know is everything else is just a polyglottonous private way. We don't have any, the list it just says private, and then everything else is assumed, excuse me, it says public and everything else is assumed to be private with no differentiation between what was a way put in under subdivision, what was a way, predating subdivision, what was a way that was put in not on, so it's again, it's the private way that's kind of a soup, but the public ways we know definitively.
right. Well, I'm just looking at, bullet number 2 is just us kind of regurgitating how access to residential properties is actually made. And we don't list
Public
that
ways.
a town way, a public way. Now, I know that we're not necessarily going to try to regulate the public ways because presumably because it's a public way, it has been brought up to acceptable standards. But, if we're listing here all of the ways by which one can have access and frontage, do we want to include a town way?
Well, wouldn't the 4th bullet cover that if it was created before the subdivision control law?
But the 4th bullet is then going on to say, then certified by the planning board as having sufficient width, et cetera, versus what I'm saying is, do you want to just add in a bullet that says, street, you've got frontage on a town way?
I agree with
Can somebody give me an example of a public way that exists
Yeah.
before the, what?
The one in
Thank-
between the gas station and Atlantic Bagel.
between the gas station and what?
Atlantic Bagel.
Let me bring up the streets
Atlantic
list.
Bagel.
Hold on. It's better, hold on. one
That's-
second.
That's not a street.
It's called
Okay.
called Town Way.
Is that the one is that parking way?
No parking ways is the other one.
It's the sidewalk between.
But
the
it's in
gas
between
station-
Parking Way and South Main, right?
Yeah, and Town Way is not listed on the list of street names.
Why can't I find the list? Hold on, what's
The
that?
street.
Also, hi, everyone. Sorry, I've joined you. I
Hi,
had a
Lauren.
chip meeting that ran over.
Anyway,
Hold on.
It may not be it may not really be important. I just add that what we're really trying to do here is establish standards for these non-subdivision control law private ways. But what we're listing here in number 2, access to residential properties may achieved by any of the following means. Well, if we're going to list all of the ways that access is achieved, access by a town way is one of them. But another thought is, do we even have to really repeat this here? This is.
I still don't know that there's any.
What? There are public,
public roads that were created before.
yes, Margin Street was date accepted 1941. Parker Avenue was accepted by town in 1897. Pleasant Street was accepted in 1939. Redgate Line in 1930. So these are all the public, anything.
Can we go back to number 2? Here's my suggestion for this.
Yeah.
Because they were still not created pursuant to the subdivision control law. So the second, I don't see it in front of me, but the second bullet,
Bringing it up.
say both streetway is defined in that is publicly or privately owned, but not created pursuant to the state subdivision control law. That'll cover those roads.
But
If they're
it's not
covered,
private.
if they're not covered by the 4th bullet, they'll be covered by the 2nd bullet, if you
But-
add the word public. Publicly or privately owned in the 2nd bullet.
So if you want to add the word "and" is
That is
publicly,
publicly or privately owned, because, Margin Street accepted in the 1940s may not be built to the standards that the subdivision control law today would require, so it's outside the subdivision control law. It didn't exist, the subdivision control law didn't exist yet, so.
Carolyn, was that your question or point or not?
Well, as I said, you could approach this one of 2 ways. The way you've set this up is, here we are listing all the ways by which a residential lot may have access. And you list everything but a town accepted way. So my suggestion was either add in a town accepted way if this is just kind of our background or setting the stage, so to speak, or conversely, you could take this out because it's not really necessary. What you're looking to do is regulate adequacy or issue determinations as to the adequacy of these non-subdivision control law private ways. So we could just say, the purpose of this whole regulation is to just target those types of ways.
Or basically just define and have something to point to of what a common
Yes.
driveway.
It doesn't hurt to add another bullet. I mean,
Yeah, except then another bullet. I mean, the rest of this is designed, like the next section on the dimensional criteria is designed for the 2 things that we, the 2nd and 3rd bullet. Then we have to add another design criteria. I don't know. Maybe we don't, but
but
I don't
because
see
you've
that-
got to.
I don't see how adding the words I just added in the 2nd bullet doesn't achieve.
I guess what Carolyn's trying to do is we have a description of all the ways of access, and then we just need to make the distinction that the regulations are only applying to these 2 right here, which is actually these 3 right here.
Correct. So my suggestion would be either add in public ways as you're showing it here, or change number 2 so that we're not setting up access to a residential lot can be by any of these ways. Instead, why don't we just start to get into, these regulations
These are regulations.
apply to, and then we just have the last 3 bullet points.
I think it's actually cleaner to say, to do the latter, which what Carolyn is suggesting is just, it's because the average person, it doesn't give a shit that there are like 6 different types of ways, and they
Yeah.
just know, does this apply to me? So saying something like, this regulation applies.
That's fine.
Yeah, and I like the word applies as opposed to achieved as well. But, yeah,
So we're gonna delete that. And Tom, I'm not really keeping these, I can send you this, but I think we're deleting this because it's not subdivision, and we're leaving it to privately not created under subdivision control, a common driveway, or a way in existence prior.
All right.
And Tom, ultimately, this is, I mean, this is the planning board's regulation. So if there's something that we do today that when you read it,
I was just trying to have everything in one spot, one-stop shopping for a property owner or developer. And, you know, as we get on to the next 2 sections, you know, we are deferring people to chapter 325 of our bylaw. I don't, it's fine. It's fine. Let's just move on. So that means number 3, take out that subdivision part. All right, the dimensions in number 3 are the common driveway one is from existing, and it was the middle one. Then the non-subdivision way measurements came from the Plymouth bylaw, which you know, Brian and John have both seen and did not object to. The major change in the common driveway is not the dimensions, it's the length, not the layout and the width of the pavement, it's the length of the common driveway and the number of lots served. And again, you know, our data shows that we are a big outlier on our common driveway regulations on how big they can be and how many lots they can serve. So, you know, the justification for, you know, I know Clark's going to push back on this one, but the justification is that, you know, going up to 8 lots is skirting the subdivision control laws. I mean,
Yeah.
it's basically an end around it. So, and for something that's going to be longer than 350 feet, I think it's, again, that the major driver of this is safe and adequate access. We can justify that if you are going to make it longer than that, then it needs to be brought up to the next level of design standards, which would be the non-subdivision street and way. So,
which really means if it doesn't comply with this, it really needs a planning board approval and review for safety and other
Right.
things. Yeah, I mean, that's
which is what, like, you know, when we get an A&R like we had a couple of weeks ago, we need to be doing this anyway. Now, you know, when we first, you know, at the bylaw hearing, Clark said, well, what's the standards? What's the standards? Well, here are the standards that we've had standards for common driveways. We're changing them a bit, but we haven't had for anything else. And so this is where it's going to be.
And Tom, on the page above that, I'm just thinking about all the examples, kind of using them as case studies of recent A&Rs that have been proposed to your board. Does that answer the question if someone comes to you where there's ambiguity on a street or private way, where you could point to this and be like, I'm sorry, what you're trying to build on is not a common driveway? Like, does that answer the question there? Like, have we done enough there where you feel confident that you could point to this section and be like, I'm sorry?
Yeah, I think now we're
Yeah.
saying here's what they are. Here's how they are defined by our definition. Here's how they are defined by design and construction standards. And we should be able to do that. The one we had a couple of weeks ago is going to involve the 4th bullet, because the developer is taking the position that whatever that way is an actual extension of a certain road. I'm not going to name it, but
Well, it's a driveway. It's a
where
driveway.
I think it's just a common driveway off the cul-de-sac end of that road, but you know, but this is going to make it a lot clearer for us as to identifying what it is we're dealing with. All right, so number 4. who is that?
Yeah, number 4, I've got, wait, number 3,
Yeah,
I don't think that's me. Anyway, on number 3, a lot of towns, actually, I'd say the majority, in looking through them, also define the width of the paving. In other words, layout might be 24 feet with a 3-foot shoulder on either side or something.
Yeah.
I'm making that up, which gets you down to 18, but we're not, we don't address the paved portion here.
yes, we do, the second column.
The second what?
It says minimum pavement width, the second column.
Well, what he's saying is that in our.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was misreading. Yeah, stupid me. Okay, Tom's right. I'm wrong.
No,
But
but
there's something in, our common driveways currently that talks about the shoulder width. So in the example of a 26-foot layout, the way it works is that there's 20 feet of pavement
Yeah.
and there's a minimum shoulder width of 3 feet on each side. And what these regulations have dropped is that 3-foot shoulder on either side. So in
yeah,
this
that may
case,
have been an oversight on my part, but there are a lot of roads that are, the pavement is not set uniformly down the middle of the layout. So there's lots of examples all over the place. If you want to put in the 3-foot minimum, that's fine by me.
I guess it's implied though, if you're paving 20 feet and you have to lay out 26, it certainly implies you've got 3 feet either way, 3-foot shoulder, but I don't know. I'm not trying to.
yeah.
No, that's right. I mean,
No,
by putting in the minimum shoulder length, you're basically saying that every time you build something, a road or a driveway, you've got to put the pavement squarely down the middle of the layout, so that you, I'm sorry, my formatting is horrible with this thing. I'm not a big, I haven't mastered columns very well. So.
Tom, I'm gonna send this back to you with a neat little table.
All right,
Okay.
so in the design and construction.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Actually, before we leave this table, if I could just ask, I assume that the reason we put this in here is that we have it under the heading of dimensional criteria, and that this is what the standard either is or what we want the standard to be. Is that correct?
Correct. So
Okay.
today in the comment, I'll show you what is in the common driveways currently, just so you sort of see it, because we're sort of riffing off of that and modifying it, and then we're creating a new standard for the non-subdivision private ways. Driveway.
Katie, while you're pulling that up, can I just maybe
Yeah.
put a question out there for the group
Yep.
and council? So I know it's like not easy, but is it possible that we could take on the undertaking of creating these roads so that they're safer and more passable and fire easements, and then we can adopt them so we can actually get credit for those roads that we're talking about? And from what I understand, we lose some funding. Carolyn, if you could mention a little bit about Chapter 90
Yep.
funding that we lose out on as a result of being this cute town with these cute roads, which I like, but I'm just curious about the economics behind it and what that might look like if, I know it would be almost impossible to do, but I'm just curious if a lot of things have been studied through the master plan and other things, like this group in particular. Has anyone done any kind of economics on it? And if the benefit of the town was so much, then maybe we could help with some of the neighborhoods that wouldn't want to pay for this. I don't know. It's super complicated, I know, but just putting it out there, it could maybe be something that could be talked about.
So Carolyn, can you comment on whether we're losing out on Chapter 90 funds by not having more accepted public ways?
You are, because that is based on how many miles of townways you actually have in your. So you are, but at the same time,
That's
it must be easy to get some of these more narrow ways accepted by town meeting.
It also then puts the burden on the town to maintain these, and
Mhm.
that's been historically a reason why we have not accepted that many private ways as public ways.
And that's why the town, yeah, and the town
Because
has
of the tax
adopted,
base.
right, and the town has adopted a policy for those neighborhoods to do just that. It was done last year with, or the year before with Cedar Acres Lane.
So
Because
there is a mechanism for the abutters on private ways to now, if 80% of the abutters agree, they can upgrade the lane and have it attached, the cost of which attached to their real estate tax bill as a betterment spread over 10 years. So there is a mechanism for the private way owners to actually upgrade and repave, not, but it's still on their dime versus what Paul is referring to, which is accepting them as a public way, then getting more Chapter 90 funds and then putting them on the town roadway plan. To answer your question directly, Paul, nobody has done that analysis yet in terms of like, if we somehow accepted those 12 miles of private ways, how much more will we get in Chapter 90, and would that pay for them to be on the town roadway plan? I think the answer is no, because here's what I know. We get $250,000 in Chapter 90 every year, and we have to add in roughly another $250,000 to $200,000 every year out of our own fund in order to be able to just keep up with our public ways. So Chapter 90 basically pays for half or less than half of the cost of maintaining our existing public ways on a 20-year cycle. So that's why our town has chosen to go on the cheap and not accept more, because we know that even though we get more Chapter 90, it's still only half of the cost of repaving them on a regular schedule. And so we've left it to the citizens to fend for themselves using the town policy and paying for it out of their own pocket.
Got it. Thank you.
So this is,
Yeah, which is a separate issue from this regulation. I know Clark tried to cloud this issue with this regulation or with the bylaw definitions in his letter. That's a separate issue, and that's a townwide policy that the select board has to drive, whether we're going to start accepting more public ways. And frankly, because we have the policy we do, we need this to better regulate what we have now.
So if I can, well, Katie, well, you've got this up on the screen. So the reason I was asking, we have paragraph 3, we have dimensional criteria, and now we have what the dimensional criteria is, but we don't really say what that means or what to do with that. Are we trying to suggest here that if this private way meets this minimum dimensional criteria, that it will be deemed to be an adequate way?
We addressed that. We're coming to that in section 5 of this.
Okay. The other reason I ask is, and I've read the whole thing through, I realize we get to that later, but I think we need a little bit of text here around number 3 as to, are these minimum, this is minimum criteria. And if there is going to be a process by which, if you have a private way that satisfies this criteria, is the building inspector simply going to be able to look at this and say, okay, the minimum width, minimum shoulder, et cetera, has been met, so therefore I can issue a building permit, or not, because the other question that then comes to mind is, if I'm somebody's reading this and I stop and I get to dimensional criteria and I say, but wait a minute, I live on a private way that's only 12 feet wide. I'm never going to satisfy this dimensional criteria. So I think what you're trying to set up here is some standards that if these standards are met, you can bypass this planning board determination.
correct.
And fall under that or don't satisfy their criteria, you need to then go to the planning board for the determination.
If there is an incremental dwelling being added, so if you're a pre-existing abutter, it doesn't apply. It only
Which is what-
applies when a new dwelling is being added, and it only applies to that applicant.
That's what section 5 says.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, as
Yeah.
you're looking at, member of the public out there who's going to pick up these regulations and look at this and try to sort through, well, how does this apply to me? And if these are minimum standards that, if met, mean that I don't have to go through this process, maybe we add something in here that states that
Up front.
up front. And my other comment is, I know we get into a predetermination in the building inspector and the planning board later. We got to remember the authority of the building inspector when he's looking at a building permit. He can either operate under the building code or the zoning bylaw. If we're going to say that the building inspector is authorized to issue building permits on some of these pre-subdivision control law private ways, provided they satisfy these minimum design criteria, I think we're going to have to bring some of that into the zoning bylaw to authorize the building inspector to do that. I don't think we can just do that in a planning board regulation.
Well, also, Carolyn, I agree with you, but B, there are other criteria that really have to be applied in addition to dimensional, and that's access.
Mhm.
Paper,
Yep.
illusory, blah, 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 adequate.
Right.
So nobody should look at this and say, that's all I need. That's a good starting point.
Let me just ask one question along that train of logic though, Carolyn, which is currently he can deny a building permit on a common driveway if it doesn't meet the standards, correct? Or are you saying he can't?
Well, again, the technically, no, it shouldn't be, his authority should not be deriving from a planning board regulation. Technically, his power is deriving from either the building code or under the zoning bylaw. So if the zoning bylaw marries the regulation somehow, I think we're okay. I have to say, I deliberately went through the bylaws looking for any kind of regulations regarding common driveways, and I didn't see them. I know this separate document exists, but I don't see how we link those together. And I think that if we're going through this exercise, we should do this. So we should put something in the bylaw that acknowledges, that authorizes these regulations, and also maybe we put the minimum standards in for the building inspector to make a predetermination. We put something to that effect in the bylaw. We don't have to repeat everything that's in the regulation, but we've got to have enough linkage between the two.
I thought that's what we were doing with referring to the regulations. I thought that's why we went through that whole exercise of adding the language referring to the regulations.
To the proposed zoning amendment, yes, but I was just going to say, as your bylaw currently exists, you define a common driveway, but there's nothing that then even speaks to regulations out there.
Well, I guess I'm sorry. So I understand your comment in light of the existing, but assuming that Article 6 passes and the zoning amendments to the definitions pass that have specific references to regulations, does that cover us?
I think so. I want to recheck that because I know I want to just make sure we do cover that. But I think yes.
Okay. All right. So that makes me feel a little bit better because part of the reason we went through that whole exercise during the public hearings was to create that linkage so that the planning board was able to make regulations and then John was able to enforce regulations.
Yeah, I think we certainly don't want to have a situation, a case come up where somebody says the building inspector doesn't have the statutory authority to deal with this. It's it's not in the bylaws, it's not in 40A. It's just in a regulation that could be changed. So I think linking it, as Carolyn suggests, is a wise move. It doesn't cost a penny, and it might take care of an objection.
Except that we can't do it for this town meeting. It's too late now.
No, we
So-
did add some language though, Tom, and I will go back and double check that.
No, I
because
know we added the language, and I was thinking about this before our meeting, that anticipating this comes up in the planning board, when we discuss this. You know, I'm not expecting necessarily, given where we are in the planning board right now, I'm not expecting an instantaneous vote on the 17th to approve this. So if this regulation was made effective after the definition articles pass the town meeting, does that cover us? If they don't go into effect until that new definitions
after.
with the linkage that we created is. I'm just a little frustrated at hearing the building inspector doesn't have authority at this, you know, hearing this for the first time today, but. You know, I just make the regulation effective after the town meeting. That's fine. I just want to make sure that covers us, because then we have to wait till the spring to amend the bylaw again.
So we inserted, so part of the language we inserted, and this is what's going to special town meeting, is common driveways where allowed shall be governed by the planning board's regulation therein effect. And under a qualified way, with your help, Carolyn, we added the planning board may adopt rules and regulations pertaining to the adequacy of pre-subdivision control ways after a public hearing to be advertised at least 14 days in advance.
Well,
Right.
All right.
I think the planning board can, adopt these regulations, but I'm wondering what power a regulation has if there's some question as to whether the building inspector or whomever, or some question as to whether it's really in our bylaws or not. I don't think you have to spell out the
But-
metrics.
But I go back to all the work that you did, Woody, when you looked at the 20 communities in terms of how they
Yeah.
handle common driveways. Half of them spelled it out in the bylaws and the other half said see regulations. So when we know for a fact with common driveways that half of the towns actually just handle regulating common driveways with dimensions and build through rules and regulations that are referred to in their bylaws. And then when we looked at residential access, we had two models. We had Plymouth, which spelled it out in gory detail in their bylaws. And then we had Wellesley, who again said, see rules and regulations. So it's up to Carolyn to tell us the right way to do this, but I thought we had discussed ad nauseum the ability to add the reference to the rules and regulations as the link between the bylaw where John Hallen's power stems from to the actual rules and
Right.
regulations.
And I think the way we've done it with those two definitions, I'm satisfied that it does link them.
Okay,
Okay,
He's going to be looking at the bylaw definitions. He's going to say that it also has to be in compliance with regulations, so it links the two of them.
okay. But your point still stands, Carolyn, that you think under dimensional criteria, there should be some kind of introduction sentence here that says, if you have a private way or a common driveway that meets the dimensional criteria before, you're essentially adequate. If it doesn't, see section 5, where the rest of the details are spelled out as to what the implications are.
I'm sorry, I just assume that anybody's going to read this is going to read the whole thing. And to repeat, unless we repeat what's in section 5 exactly verbatim, there's the risk we create conflicting language here. Section 5 makes it obvious as to how adequacy is going to be determined. And what presumptions are being made. I don't, it's a relatively minor point, but we put the same thing in two different places. It's unnecessarily repetitive and risks that unless the language matches exactly, we're going to have a problem. I don't want people to stop reading this at section 3 and think they're okay. You know, that's my point.
Okay,
make a comment?
and on three, the minimum shoulder, it's really 3 feet on either side. It's not a total of 3.
May I make a
A
suggestion?
total of 6.
Yeah,
Thank you. Just in terms of the discussion point that you were just having, I see Tom's point to not be repetitive, but I also think that there are a lot of people who unfortunately don't read everything, as much as we want them to. But would it be useful to then at least see, like, reference this number to like direct people to go back again in case they do diagonal read? I think that might be a compromise.
Well,
Let's try it.
why don't you just, see section 5?
Just like refer again to section, whatever you wanted to reference, just because I hear what both of you are saying.
Yes, thank you, that's fine.
Thank you, Lauren.
You all.
clean this up later.
Yeah. Okay, we gotta move on, and we're gonna be here all day.
Yep.
One, third bullet under 4.
Take out this reference to the subject chapter 325 again.
Okay, let's.
Yeah, I mean.
Third bullet, minimum grade, maximum grade is 6% in the town bylaws. We can't change this without real discussion.
Where does it say that in the bylaw?
So it's in 325, section 26, Tom.
Yeah, that's for a subdivision control road. All right. This is not a subdivision control road, but that's okay. If we want to make it uniform, that's fine by me.
I
I
would
think-
make it uniform rather than come up with a number that doesn't exist anywhere.
I think that was the point, is that I thought the whole premise of this was that we had subdivision control as kind of the maximum. We had common driveways as the minimum. What we were trying to define was the middle, which is the non-subdivision street in the way. So if the maximum grade for a subdivision was 6%, it didn't make sense to allow non-subdivision ways to have a 10% grade.
All right, that's fine.
Yeah. So there was that. The other thing that I just noticed is that we have a whole bunch of language under common driveway about what the course needs to look like in terms of the foundation, and then all the layers of bituminous concrete.
Yeah, which I believe is I believe that's in our current regulation.
It's in our current, exactly. So it's in our current for common driveways. But on the flip side, we've got nothing for non-subdivision street and way. So I guess my point, Tom, is that
This is why we have John and Brian look at these things. They're the experts on this. I don't build roads.
right. And that's why I guess my only suggestion is that we need to go back to Tom to go back to Brian, because I don't think he's truly focused on this, because if I'm reading this correctly, this language right here is just describing the foundation, the crusher run. There's no description equivalent to what's down here, which is the layers of bituminous concrete laid on top of it.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
So I think all I'm saying is that here we're missing a description of what they call the roadway surface.
All right.
Yeah, and much of that may be common to both common driveways and private ways. I don't know, but we could at least see.
I just
apply to both, just to make
I'm
it
just
simpler.
frustrated that I would assumed he would have suggested that if it jumped out at him, but
My suggestion, Tom, is that Brian is really great one-on-one, but sometimes on emails, especially if Jason Federico is CC'd or on the email chain, he just assumes somebody else gets it. So I think my ask would be to send him an email directly and call him privately to get him to focus on this and just schedule a meeting.
Happy to help with that.
Would you second that?
I said, I'm happy to help with that too. I can get into his calendar. So Tom, just let me know what works for you.
And
See if you can set something up next week. I'm pretty clear next week, so.
okay. And Tom, just there's we have what's in common driveways, but if you need Brian to kind of figure out what is there's two options here for the roadway surface on the non-subdivision private way. We can either make it the same as the common driveway if he feels that's sufficient, or he could choose the language out of 325-35, which is the roadway surface description for subdivision control ways.
Yep.
And I'm not an expert, but when I honestly read what's in subdivision control and I read under what common driveway, they read pretty damn similar. But again, this is where we need Brian's expertise. The other thing that I noticed, Tom, is that I think I would change this to turnarounds of not less than 50. Because in the subdivision control, under 325, what is it?
I mean, whatever you suggest is fine. I mean, I didn't change the language from Plymouth. And thinking that we have three different animals here, but if we're gonna make the non-subdivision control roads like subdivision control roads, that's fine by me. So
I guess my only point is that we don't have to make it more. By choosing 60, you were making it more than what is required for subdivision by leaving the Plymouth language in, the problem is that it
all right,
creates,
that's fine. That's fine.
and I was just trying to find the reference, but
Well, just use that as a principle, basic principle.
yes.
Every number should be double checked to be sure that it's consistent with our other regulations rather than consistent with Plymouth, which is your relevancy.
That's fine. Why I rely on other people to look at it too. Try not to reinvent the wheel, but that's great. So, you know, I'll go over all this with Brian.
Yeah.
He's really the driver of this stuff here, this section and the next part of it about drainage and stuff.
So 325-26 F is dead end streets. And that's where, at least in our subdivision control law, there's two things it says about dead end streets. One, it can't be longer than 1,500 feet, which is why we made subdivision control ways half of it, 750. And it says that a cul-de-sac outside radius of not less than 50 feet. So I think we turned that to not less than 50. And I think here, not less than 50.
Okay.
Is good. We have this here in our common driveways. Corners onto common driveways have a radius of not less than 15 feet. I'm wondering whether we need a parallel up here. Just as a point of reference, under subdivision control, under 325-26 B8, it says that our radius at a corner should be 30 feet for a subdivision. We've got it 15 feet for a common driveway. So that would mean that if we're using that logic for non-subdivision private ways, it has to be greater than 15 feet. And again, we should have Brian check that too.
Okay. I mean, just got to go over all of these technical things with him.
Yeah, I think that's,
Fine tune it all, so.
okay. So, so I guess maybe that's the best way to summarize that is like, let's get Brian to go over with a fine tooth comb subdivision, the
Okay.
non-subdivision streetway.
Yep.
Can I ask a question right there under the very first one for common driveways? We
Mhm.
have the turnaround or the backup area satisfactory to the highway surveyor. Is it really the highway surveyor, or do we actually get the fire chief or the fire chief's designee involved?
Well, this was a question that the planning board debated because nobody seems to know who the highway surveyor is in town.
Do we have one?
We
Well-
don't, it's no longer a separately elected position as it once was.
Well, is it appointed
so-
or
the
doesn't
pr-
it exist?
Also the DP
Either Brian or Carl Sestito fills that role now. Brian's
it's
the head of the
Carl.
department. Brian's the head of the department and Carl's the directly under for, I think,
Why don't we use the department's name and not a title, which
That's a good
which
idea.
may
In case it
change.
changes, yeah.
Department of Public Works then.
Yeah,
But do we also seek the input of the fire chief? Because usually we're looking at turnarounds or keys or whatever, because it's all about fire access and being able to turn a truck around.
Yeah,
yeah, that's common. I mean, that's standard.
Right, but I'm just saying, but here we're just saying a turnaround that's satisfactory to the DPW. I'd suggest adding in and fire chief.
Or public safety, either one.
yeah, public safety.
Maybe it should say, and or their designee.
Well, you don't have to, just they can designate, if they have the responsibility, they can do it or delegate it, but
Okay,
I think, I just,
she'll have turnaround satisfactory to the fire chief and the director of Department of Public Works. Oops. Okay. Some of the stuff like T-shape and all that just applies to common driveway, so you wouldn't have that on a normal private way. Okay, so now we're down to applicable to non-subdivision ways and common driveways. This is where
This is where Brian did look at it and suggest this kind of stuff before, but
we'll have them double check this language here.
yeah, and we'll change all the references to the highway surveyor in this one too.
Yeah,
And some of that doesn't need the fire chief. It should just be the new term for the highway surveyor.
why don't you drop director off and just say Department of Public Works? That'll be consistent with Conservation Commission and, others norms.
okay. All right, any other comments on this section here?
I'm just wondering if the first one, if, I know Brian's gonna look at it, but if it should just stay after that, where applicable.
Okay.
And delete, and in compliance with the then applicable. See, I don't know what that means, abutting property and in compliance with the then applicable. Maybe delete that. With,
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Oh my Lord, we have a lot of references. Highway surveyor has a lot of friggin' power. Okay, now we're on to like the really tricky stuff at 222. Permitting issues. This is where we get into the meat of when does this trigger if there needs to be an upgrade to the way because it doesn't meet the previously stated standards. So Tom, why don't you start taking over from here a little bit?
So 5A is just saying that no relief is going to be granted or a building permit issued until for a new dwelling. I added the new dwelling, the word new because of the way the definitions were written.
Yeah.
So, you know, everything, in other words, before any relief is given or a permit is given, you need to make the determination of adequacy. The next section B is the presumptions regarding those standards that are in the previous section. So the answer is yes.
So prior to a building permit, should you mention no zoning relief shall be granted nor a building permit? What about any permits before building permit? Like an A&R or
Demolition permit, you mean, or?
there's just so many permits before a building permit, right? So I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, but all we're concerned about because of the definition, the way it was written, is construction of a new home on a way.
A question for Carolyn. Is a new dwelling is it or is it not a reconstructed dwelling?
Well, that's gonna be up to the zoning board, isn't it? Because one
Well,
could
no,
argue.
it says we can't grant relief.
Well, this is what I'm saying is that I think it's a good question to raise now, Woody, because are we talking about a vacant lot upon which a new dwelling is going to be put, or are we talking about raising an existing structure
Right.
and putting a new dwelling on a lot where there was a prior structure?
And of course, that's more or less allowed by right in our bylaws now, in section 8.9, I think.
I believe that we're addressing the former, which is the undeveloped lot.
Right, so that was that's why my
incremental
question. What does new mean? Does it, if it doesn't apply to a reconstructed non-conforming house, fine.
If it's, yeah, all right.
I just wouldn't want to get
intent-
wordsmithed by a lawyer on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yep.
as a lawyer, there's plain and ordinary meanings to things too.
Well,
But that's it. No, I get it. And the intent here is to only regulate when there's something new being added. If you're reconstructing a house, you're not adding a new house. You're just fixing the one that's there. So you're not intensifying the use. So after.
You say new?
that's what
just
you say.
Let's put it in capitals and underline it. That'll
Say
make
a
it
new-
absolutely clear.
But Tom, do you want to be as specific to say building? Do you want to just say nor permits?
No,
Right,
I
so you're
don't-
trying to say
I
that
don't- I
actual
don't
adequacy
care- I
should
don't care about a demolition permit because that's not what we're not talking about a house that's already there.
What
I
about
don't
an
care if
A&R?
A&Rs are usually new lots with new dwellings. So if I could just think for a moment, after the word dwelling,
If we say on an undeveloped lot,
on an undeveloped lot,
Ah,
yes.
there you go. There you go.
now, I know you're focusing just on dwellings, but is it possible that there are any commercial properties out there that would be on these private ways, non-subdivision,
Sure.
pre-visualized private
Right,
way?
That's a good point.
This is just a residential access by a regulation. If we have to separately do one for commercial, we should. So this isn't intended to cover commercial properties.
But it, as long as we're specific and say this is residential only.
The title
Well,
says.
title.
How much more can we say?
Okay, all right. I guess my version didn't have. Yeah, no, it did have residential. Okay.
Okay, so shall be issued, sorry, for a new dwelling on an undeveloped lot on a streetway or common driveway.
Great. Yeah, no, I'm comfortable with that now.
And I think there's just some language missing as we read on further, until a determination of the adequacy of the street / way or common driveway has been made by the planning board.
Okay, but I'm not every, reading up further on in C, not every decision may be made by the planning board.
Yeah, and we're gonna get to that, and I've got an issue with the predetermination by the building inspector, so. You
All
know,
right,
we can,
that's fine. Then that's why it's there to discuss
Yep.
and see if it's legal. So,
Does this little clause do anything for us? Or can I delete it?
Which clause?
The one that I'm highlighting up here, this one right here.
Per the applicable definitions?
Yeah,
no, it really doesn't.
because I think it's just cleaner to end it like that.
Section B is, I admit it's awkwardly written, but such is life. It's tired.
Wait.
It says what the presumptions are and what the presumptions aren't. So,
Could we change, I'm nitpicking, no zoning relief may be granted rather than shall be granted? Shall implies that you will, and the zoning board hasn't been heard from yet in this.
that's a good one.
Okay. Is it adequacy? For. It's sections, is it just section 4? It's section 3 and 4, right? Because we've got dimensional criteria in
All right,
3, right,
fine.
Tom?
that's fine.
Okay.
Sections.
And
Yes.
for above, okay.
The legal requirements set forth in the applicable definitions within the zoning bylaw are met. I'm not sure what we're referring to there.
The new definitions.
Oh,
Well, the
Legal-
new definitions define what an adequate way is, right?
can we,
I don't,
set forth in the definition of adequate access within the zoning.
it's not adequate access, it's adequate way. If I recall correctly.
I don't understand. What is a legal requirement?
Yeah,
set
you
forth?
know what, I just say, and the applicable definitions within the zoning bylaw. Get the legal requirement correct. Sections 3 and 4 and the applicable definitions in the zoning, within the zoning bylaw. I'm just trying to create ties between the two, this
Yeah.
regulation and the definitions.
Is your board, I mean, I don't,
Because there will be people on my board who will nitpick this point to death.
yeah, but your board as a whole feels to me like it's going to be taking on more responsibilities when building permits are applied for.
Mhm.
And is it prepared? I mean, it's a question of time and you know, a good use of time. Maybe
Well,
it is, but
Again, you know, we're
we
adopting.
haven't been doing it up to now, so
No,
you're
and that's.
adding work.
You know, part of it was to rely on the building inspector quite a bit for these determinations, and unless he says it's inadequate or it's challenged, I didn't think we'd see as many in that respect, but, you know, I'm looking forward to what Carolyn has to say about that.
But see, now A says that okay, well, this is different. It's a new dwelling and undeveloped lot. All new dwellings and undeveloped lots come before the planning board. Because the planning board is required to render a formal determination of adequacy.
Only if it's on a pre-subdivision control law private way
or a common drive.
or a common driveway, right?
Yeah, well, it's a new dwelling
But
on an
all right,
undeveloped
well,
lot.
Can we just then, I'd like to hear what Carolyn's point was about not having the building inspector make this determination, because I thought he would weed through a lot of the stuff. And there
All right,
would
well,
be, all right.
Well, I was gonna say,
Just,
one,
if you could just jump to C for a minute. The
Hmm?
first bullet under C, by the way, was Clark's idea. Clark wanted to, and again, I don't know how the planning board's gonna do this and fit in its schedule, but Clark wanted to go through the list of streets that supposedly the planning board is charged with maintaining and go through and make some predeterminations of what's adequate and what's not, without a building permit, without anything, but just let's say, okay, Margin Street as it currently exists is adequate, you know, for what's currently the use on Margin Street. I don't think that avoids if somebody was to build a new house on Margin Street, you had an added house, that you're still going back to this process, but the first bullet, just so everybody understands, was
Mhm.
Clark's
But, you
point
know,
about
yeah, Tom, you know,
predetermination.
that's fine for a fully developed way. Let me pick on Dolan Lane. Who's going to make a determination on Dolan Lane? Based on the houses that are there today, all three of them, or the planned 10 to 12?
Well, that's just it. The predetermination process is not going to preclude a further review down the line if there's new construction proposed.
Okay, all right. I'm just,
I don't have a
yeah.
problem putting this bullet in if Clark thinks, you know, the planning board is somehow going to pick an empty night and say, let's go through the list of streets and have a predetermination hearing. Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
It's all relative. I would
May happen.
argue that it would take the full agenda time of a planning board meeting for each street
All right, well,
away. I mean, that's a
would
big job.
Then let's take the.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not trying to torpedo anything other than.
No, I'm not, and I'm throwing it in
sensitive.
there as a bone to Clark because he brought up this point as a way of determining adequacy of streets. And I think it's fine if we had the time to do it, number one, but I don't think, like you
Well,
said.
I think it's relative to the activity that it has today and the proposed activity tomorrow, which may or may not be defined. You've pointed out there may not even be an active building permit
Right.
application.
Yeah, that's kind of where I fall on it, where I appreciate the fact that you're trying to perhaps create an accommodation for Clark, but it's actually creating work that may never be needed on your board's behalf because you're only addressing when it's new construction on an undeveloped lot.
And let's take the bullet out.
I mean, I don't know, Carolyn, what do you think? Is this good to have here or not good?
which bullet are we talking
The
about?
first,
This one.
That one.
to do an inventory and then render a judgment.
Yeah, I hear what Tom is saying, that that's really just a carrot or a peace offering to Clark. I don't know if the planning board's actually going to do that. I suppose you could maintain an inventory, in which case keep it in, but I think it might be something that perhaps needs to be left in at least until the planning board sees it and see whether or not the planning board backtracks off of wanting to create this inventory.
How about I put
Yeah.
brackets around it?
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. Now, the second bullet was to just state the obvious. If there's an A&R, part of that process, really the only decision we have to make under that process is adequacy of the way. So that's clear. It's the next bullet where I was trying to set up a process where the planning board is not overburdened and not having this new type of adequacy hearing for everything that goes on. And given the standards and the presumptions that we're creating of adequacy and inadequacy, to let John make the initial decision. Let him report it to us. And if we think there's a problem, or public safety or public works thinks there's a problem, then you go into the hearing. But I have to believe that the building inspector is doing his job correctly, he's going to weed out most of this without the need of this separate hearing that we're setting up.
So my concern about this section really had to do with thinking of like an appeal process. We have it set up that if the building inspector makes his initial determination and sends notice to the various departments and boards, and if no one objects, so be it. And or if there is an objection, then the planning board has a public hearing and so on. If the planning board is really the body here that is supposed to be making the determination as to the adequacy of the ways, I don't have an issue if the planning board wants to give the building inspector, again, minimum standards, criteria, whatever we want to call it, that he can run down the list like in sections 3 and 4 and check off and say, yes, these standards are met. The concern I do have is that if someone is not satisfied with the determination of the planning board, their only appeal process is going to be a cert petition to court.
In other
Now,
words, not going to the zoning board.
No, this would be considered, an administrative. I mean, I don't think you can do that by a regulation anyway. I think maybe if you wanted to set that up by a bylaw, that you wanted to have a planning board decision appealed to the zoning board, I think that would have to be built into a bylaw. But I think this whole thing becomes a bit messy in the sense that what we're saying throughout this entire regulation is we're saying the planning board decides whether or not a way is adequate. Now, if we're going to have a predetermination issued by a building inspector, and let's say no town department objects, but let's suppose somebody else objects. Let's suppose some other abutter on the way objects, or a neighbor somehow or other objects to this. Are they going to appeal this determination by the building inspector to the zoning board of appeals, which is the normal route for appealing an order of a building inspector, when really this is a whole regulatory scheme under the planning board?
And it hasn't gone to the attorney general. I mean, I'm very surprised that you would sort of do a run around the zoning board of appeals, whereas if you look at 40A, 40A better than I do. I mean, it's the zoning board. That is
that's what I'm saying to you. But meanwhile, you're now saying the zoning board is going to deal with these predetermination issues by the building inspector when this whole regulatory scheme is the planning board. I don't think that's the intended consequence here.
The zoning board only wants to deal with appeals. We don't want to deal with each and every.
I understand, but you deal with appeals of a decision or an order of a building inspector. So if the building inspector is issuing a determination on the adequacy of the way, where does that get appealed to? It gets appealed to the ZBA. So a thought I had instead was, if we want to, and maybe it is as simple as referring back to the criteria in sections 3 and 4, that if a way satisfies either the dimensional or the design criteria established in sections 3 and 4, then the building inspector, then the way is presumed to be adequate, and the building inspector may issue a building permit. And if not, then the way has to go to the planning board for the planning board to make a determination.
Which is, well, all right. Can I ask?
I don't really buy that at all. I don't buy it because adequacy of the way, where is it? Help me on where adequacy of way, things like paper ways, illusory access are covered in up to this point. Those are also determinants of adequacy. It's not just a metrical calculation.
The regulation addresses those further on, I think section 6 or 7. But,
Well, I thought we were addressing it right here.
well, can I ask a question? We're borrowing essentially we don't have this process now other than in an A&R. We're not asked as a planning board to make determinations of adequacy of road for any other building permit that's being issued. That's what we're trying to change here.
Mhm.
We're borrowing and we're setting up this new hearing process for it that we're borrowing from Wellesley. Does Wellesley have an appeal process?
They do. I don't
Okay.
have the regulation at hand, but I
Okay.
know when I looked at it, and he did
All
have an
right.
appeal.
I mean, this is anticipating that bullet. I'm not sure where an abutter would challenge this. Where would an abutter even know?
You mean the right forum or?
Well, no, I mean, you mentioned Carolyn's example was, what if in a abutter challenge, what's the appeal process? The building inspector is getting a building permit from person A.
Mhm.
Normally, an application for a building permit, unless some zoning relief is needed, isn't going to be noticed to abutter B.
Right, right.
Okay, so abutter B isn't going to know about this. This is a process between the building inspector and the planning board. You make the initial determination of adequacy unless we object, or public safety objects, or public works objects. Your decision on adequacy will hold. If you find it inadequate, there's a hearing. If one of those three entities, public works, public safety, or planning board challenges, there will be a public hearing. I don't see a process for an abutter to be involved in at all. So then what does an abutter do? What does an abutter do in the normal course today? They
They
go
appeal
through
the issuance of the building permit.
they challenge the issuance of the permit through the section 7, 10, 15, 18 appeal process that will go through the zoning board and then ultimately to court. Further on, I mentioned site plan review standards, which meant that the appeal of our decision will be the same way you would appeal a site plan review. That's what I'm anticipating.
Okay, so let me just posit two scenarios just to play devil's advocate. So an abutter can appeal the issuance of the building permit, and we can't rule out the fact that an abutter could say the building permit shouldn't have been issued because the way doesn't meet the criteria. It's not adequate, it does not meet the criteria. That's one possibility.
Yep.
The other possibility is, suppose the building inspector says, no, I'm sorry, you've got to go to the planning board. And this property owner strenuously objects because they believe they meet all the criteria that are spelled out.
Right, they're going to go through the hearing, the adequacy hearing with the planning board, and then appeal that decision, which I'm envisioning the same appeal process for site plan review, because that's the standard we would apply to the decision-making process. It's essentially the same.
An appeal to the site plan process goes to the ZBA,
No, it goes to court.
Of course,
it goes to court. I'm just reading Wellesley, and maybe Wellesley says an appeal of determination of adequacy, an agreement to upgrade, or other decisions of the planning board under these rules and regulations shall be made by the ZBA in accordance with their special permit granting authority of the zoning bylaw. So they must have in their zoning bylaw some reference under a special permit granting authority that links into the ZBA, into their process, which we do not have.
Well, we can choose to do that, or we can choose to use the court appeal process of site plan review.
Yeah, and now you're asking people to go to court a lot. I don't think the court's going to be very happy getting extra work. This is, I don't know. I mean, the zoning board of appeals has been set up to help this process, and if the planning board wants to be the special permit authority on all building permits, fine, but I think people should understand what that entails. It's a lot of work.
Well,
I mean, we can meet every 3 months because we won't be needed. That's all right. No, I'm not being snarky. I mean,
I mean, the whole point of this is to judge the adequacy of ways in a manner which we are not doing at the present time.
right, and I'm all
Outside the A&R process, which we have to do. So the planning board's already doing it under the A&R process, which makes it logical that the planning board does it
Okay,
in other contexts. However, where should an appeal of our decision go? The abutter, I still think is, the abutter is challenging the building permit. The abutter is not involved in this process set out in this language. The abutter is still going through the normal, through the building inspector, through the ZBA process. But directly of the planning board's decision, I don't care if it goes to court or the ZBA. What do you tell me if you want to start taking appeals?
well, it's cheaper and more expeditious to go to the ZBA, I would think, than to go to court.
Fine.
Unless you're a certain member of the, never mind.
But if I'm hearing, if I'm hearing Carolyn correctly, Woody, we're just missing that link currently to throw it in your direction, because there's no reference in our bylaws to address that. Is that what you're saying, Carolyn?
Well, no, I mean,
No.
that's another aspect that Woody raises. What I was really just focusing in on was the possibility that someone could appeal this determination by the building inspector, which under chapter 40A would go to the ZBA and
Yep.
cut out the planning board entirely. And I don't think that that was quite our intent. I think the intent here was to have the planning board with standards and some consistency and historical knowledge applying these regulations.
And there probably isn't much sense to have somebody appeal to both the planning board and then the zoning board.
You know, I'll just say as a municipal attorney, I don't like bylaws that do that. I know that there are plenty that do. I personally kind of bristle at it because I don't like the idea that one board says yay and another board says nay on the exact same topic.
Right. No, I think we would rather take a pass. Let me just.
But Wellesley is setting up a process that does just that.
Understood.
All right, no, if that's, I mean, if that's what they do.
Just like there are some communities that their site plan review bylaw, their appeal is to the zoning board of appeals. I'm just saying as a personal preference, I don't like that. But you can do whatever you wish to do.
Okay,
Let me first say-
wait, Tom, let me ask Carolyn, one other question. This is A&R because it is related. There's an A&R application before the planning board. It has adequate frontage, right? It's you know, in a 50-foot frontage zone, it's got 150 feet. But the question of adequacy of access looms large. Can the planning board turn down an A&R simply in the basis of adequate access? My understanding was the planning board, if it has adequate frontage, is required to approve an A&R. Now, that may be an overstatement, but.
But let's, read on for the rest of the definition. Excuse me, my reach as I grab my subdivision regs. What we're focusing on here is the definition of a subdivision and what is not a subdivision, and the types of ways that kick in. So yes, the planning board has to look at whether or not there is frontage on a way and whether or not it meets the minimum requirements for frontage when looking at an A&R plan. But again, go back to the definition of a subdivision and what it is not. That a division of a tract of land into 2 or more lots is not a subdivision if every lot so divided has frontage on a public way or a way open to the public, or a way in existence when the subdivision control law came into effect, or a way that has, in the opinion of the planning board, sufficient width, construction, grades, etc. So when the planning board endorses that A&R plan, built into that endorsement, and this is why I think Tom has throughout these regulations has said, if subject to an A&R, the determination is as to the adequacy of the way is built into that endorsement. If the planning board has an A&R before it and they do not think that the way is adequate or built, they should deny that endorsement.
Or that the lot in question doesn't have adequate access. It may have paper access, but it doesn't have on the ground access.
Right. then they should deny it, and they should, unless of course if we're talking about a paper street, unless of course the developer is saying that, no, we realize we have to build the street.
Right,
But
but if it's
but-
just a simple subdivision of one lot into two, I don't know. I just thought that could a plan, but it's fine. I mean, I want to see these, see us really tighten things up, but I'm just wondering if A&R, the planning board's hands are somewhat tied with an A&R to determine that it has adequate frontage is not necessarily, or is it necessarily the same as adequate access? It might be, and if so, my objection goes away. My concern, it's not an objection, it's a concern.
Woody, is that current A&R situation? Is that something that the planning board deemed didn't have adequate access?
I don't know. My understanding was, and is that primarily, and there've been a court case or two that say planning boards can only reject, or primarily reject, maybe I should say, an A&R if there is not frontage, legal frontage. But legal frontage is not the same as adequate access. I don't think.
Legal frontage on an adequate way.
Woody, there's all the case law under A&R around vital access, which builds up their ability to
Yeah,
define
okay.
what is adequate access. So
All right.
when I go back to that A&R handbook that the state put out, I mean, it goes on for pages and pages about how vital access has been defined under case law. So that's what, I mean, our planning boards have not chosen to have the vital access conversation or document the vital access conversation. But it is possible.
Yeah.
And I think in the one case that we can point to on Ocean Ledge, I mean, that planning board back in 2004, 5, and 6 tried to have a vital access conversation. It just failed to document it, or we lost the minutes associated with that conversation, so that when we don't know whether that road was ever brought up to standard as discussed by the planning board at the time.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other problem, Woody, with the A&R process is that once an A&R is approved, the determination of adequacy of the way is made. And so subsequent A&Rs, you can't go back and say, oops, we didn't mean that this road isn't.
I'm sorry. I think A&Rs are rebuttable,
Okay. So,
but I don't want to get into,
yeah.
I mean, that's a different issue. I'm just thinking yes, I think most of this has to be done. This is work to be done. I'm just wondering whether either board should get involved too early on. It's just there are a lot of building permits, and we know that the kind of building permits that are being applied for tomorrow are on some problematic properties. And so the building inspector is going to be dealing with things like adequate access.
So I guess, Woody, are you arguing that the building inspector makes the first determination, and then if appealed, it goes to the planning board, and if appealed from there, it goes to land court? Is that?
Well, I guess that's what this says.
Yeah.
So maybe the planning board is better equipped to handle an appeal than the zoning board is in this matter. Don't know. They may be.
I guess one of the logics, at least in my mind, for the way this flowed is that they were already handling the issue of adequacy as it relates to A&Rs. And so for them to be the stop after the building inspector made sense to me, because they were already making this determination in their A&R process in normal course. So if the
Okay,
building,
I mean, Carolyn knows, and I have to refresh my memory. I really thought that the planning board can address and deal with adequacy and safety standards, but it was really frontage was the only, or was the primary basis for denying an A&R.
Right, but once again, like I said, when you look at what the definition is of, with respect to frontage, frontage has to be of a certain type. And one of those certain types is that, if the way doesn't have suitable width, grade, construction, et cetera, in the opinion of the planning board, then what the planning board can do is deny that A&R and say, no, you have to go through the subdivision control law process and bring that up to standards.
Right, because the standard is that it has to front on a public or private way that meets, is one of those 4 standards.
Right. So I don't mean to cut you folks off, but I have another call at 3, and I don't think we're going to wrap this up in the next couple of minutes.
All right.
Okay, well, all right. I'll
So my suggestion is that, Tom,
My suggestion is going to be to continue when we open the public hearing on the 17th to continue.
do you want to do it that way? Or do you want to have us go at it one more time as the zoning bylaw working group?
Well, we can try. I mean, I would like an answer before the 17th on the critical question of whether we can force an upgrade on the permit applicant who is causing the need for the upgrade. Because that's where we're going to have an issue of a potential conflict of interest on our board, so.
So I think the answer is yes, you can require the upgrade. I think the question that kind of presupposes that is, of course, we'd need to know what kind of rights in the way that property owner has, just in case there are any kind of restrictions or limitations on it. So we would need to know that. But assuming that, say all of the owners of lots abutting the private way all have similar references and deeds to the rights to use the way for all purposes, that also includes the right to upgrade the way. Now, the bigger question I think becomes, I think you get some pushback from property owners who say, but wait a minute, as a fundamental fairness issue, you've approved building permits for these other lots on the way. Why should I have to undertake the cost of improving the way and they all benefit from it? If the owner does decide that, okay, fine, it's worth it to me to improve the way, who maintains it going forward? That it really becomes a matter of private property disputes more so than anything. But the short answer is yes, you can, if you think that the way is inadequate, you can require upgrades. You are just, however, limited to whatever the actual width of the way is. So if we're only talking about a 12-foot wide way, we couldn't compel somebody to turn it into a 20-foot wide way.
In most of these cases, Carolyn, I think the easements are actually 40 feet, but what has historically only happened is that they've only paved 10 or 12 feet. So the easement on these ways, take mine, which is a case in point from 1910, a subdivision plan, there's a 40-foot easement. They only paved 14 feet of it.
14 feet of it, yeah.
And so all of us owned the center line on a 40-foot easement. So if it was compelled to be widened from 14 to 20 and the person chose to do it, they have the right to better it to 20.
Yes. Yes. So that, I mean, those are kind of your restrictions. I mean, obviously, this could lead to a whole host of issues of private disputes, but that's not really, that the underlying question is, can we require upgrades? Yes, we can. In the name of public safety, yes, we can.
Okay. So Carolyn, we're going to let you go since you've got a 3 o'clock, and we'll figure out whether we want to reconvene briefly to finish this conversation, or we just want to let it rip on the 17th and see what happens.
Okay. Sorry, folks.
No worries. I appreciate your 2 hours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I apologize that I had to deal with an email. So on the issue, what happened with the building inspector and the appeal, and is it everything going to be routed through the planning board and then go to court, or are we putting in a process with the ZBA?
I don't think we can put in a process with the ZBA unless we ask at annual town meeting to open up another section of the bylaws to do that. So I think for now, your option is only to go building inspector to planning board to land court unless we want to reopen bylaws under the special permit section under
No,
the,
that's all right. That's all right. When we do the rewrite, we could, we could prepare for the possibility, we can prepare for the possibility of switching it, but, the universe of building permits we're going to see for this is permits for new houses only on an undeveloped lot that are not part of an A&R process. So I don't know that the workload is going to be super large.
I think you should be prepared. I mean, I looked at the building permit data and it ranges a bit in terms of how many you're gonna see.
Well, yeah, but for completely new houses, how many new houses are we getting built a year at this point?
I'll show you if I can find the data. Building permit data. Building permit data. Oh, crap.
Well, in any event, it means that, just so how this will work practically, John's going to make a determination. So a lot of this is falling on him and he's not here to comment on that. And then there's 3 agencies he has to notify, any one of which can object and call for a hearing. Or if he makes the decision that it's inadequate, there'll be a hearing. And, you may tell me there's 20 new houses built a year. Okay. If they're all on private ways or common driveways, yes, the planning board could theoretically be conducting 20 hearings it doesn't conduct now. And we're going to have to conduct them pretty much in the same way we conduct an A&R and a site plan review. And now we'll have standards by which to make those decisions. Yes, it's more work, but that's what comes with wanting to regulate something we don't regulate at the moment. I don't know if I'm wrong in that analysis, but I don't, there's no way around it.
Maybe you could trade off this sort of oversight and get rid of the large home review.
Well,
That's one way to save some.
The rewrite gets rid of the large home review in its current form, and it's for us to discuss in the future whether it comes back, but the proposal on the table that I wrote would eliminate large home review in its present form. And, in full transparency and disclosure, the competing thought is either keep it, or the competing thought is if we set.
No, I just threw that in as.
No, I know, but if we, I
you
just want to repeat it to everybody because I don't want my board accusing me that they don't know what's going on. The alternative thought is that if we set a new limit for the size of houses through FAR, which is what we are discussing, normally if you would exceed that limit or want to exceed it, you'd need a variance. There is a thought process of letting some exceedance of that, maybe 110%, 125%, and have that by a special permit process. But the proposal will be for the current large home review process to go away.
Yeah.
But that's for us to discuss and decide upon in the future.
So here's the building permit data that I'd gotten from Jen. And so land use code 130 is raw land.
Yeah.
And so there were 3 in 2018, 1 in 2019, 12 in 2020, and 3 so far in 2021. You have to a little bit look at these 101s because unfortunately some of these 101s may be single lot exemptions where a second lot is being carved out.
Yep.
of a 101. So I guess I would say my best guess is anywhere between 5 and 10 of these hearings that you'd be hearing a year.
Right, and 5 and 10 assumes that every road is either its adequacy is challenged or it is found to be inadequate in the first instance by.
Yeah, and we look at the data here, like Beechwood, not going to be challenged in terms of adequacy.
Yeah, there was those 2 houses built down the end of the street.
Yeah, so some of these, you're right. So of let's
Those
say
two houses were built on Mill Lane. They weren't built in Beechwood Street, were they?
but I guess what
You guys
There
have
was a new house put on Dusty Wheelwright's property, yes. There was two new houses put on what formerly had just one house down the end of down near the reservoir,
Okay,
but all on Beechwood. Mill Lane, I think, might have had one.
all right, let's,
Yeah, no, I know. And
but I guess what we're saying is, as you scan down the list here, some of these you're going to immediately cross off because they're on public ways or on ones that you don't have to have a discussion about. So of that 5 to 10, let's say maybe half are going to be on public ways. So you're down to perhaps a reasonable number that your board is willing to take.
Yeah.
But that is the question at hand, which is the planning board willing to step up to regulate beyond common driveways? I guess we'll find out. So Tom, what is your preference? I mean,
if we can put something together that is, again, I want to avoid the accusation that we're rushing and not prepared, not doing our homework, blah, blah, blah. If we have something that's reasonably ready to present to the board on the 17th, again, I'm not anticipating that the planning board will swallow it all whole on the 17th. And somebody may say, and I might even suggest, let's wait till after December 13th to vote. But, if we're ready to go to present something on the 17th, we can always continue the hearing. We can take the planning board's input. If they've suggested some other changes, we can deal with that, continue the hearing. That's fine. That's probably how it will play out, I'm thinking, at this point.
Tom, can I ask your opinion on something? Sorry, Katie, I was just going to ask, do you think that the optics of what's going on right now, whatever, if it's 3 versus 3 or 4 versus 1 and then an unknown, but do you think those optics will impact the results of special town meeting vote? Do you think that it's bad optics for us if the planning board isn't in agreement with what we're proposing?
It's like what's going on in Congress right now. We can't have one person hold up everything, all work, and make it stop. And I don't want to get into all the other dynamics that are going on, but there's other dynamics that did not get discussed last night.
well, but also, Paul, what's your read on the mood, perhaps the mood of the town versus the mood of the planning board? Would a 4-1 or 3-2 vote?
Yeah,
be
does the
likely to
mood of
torpedo
the
a
board
proposal?
impact the mood of the town at all, I guess is my question.
I mean, I honestly don't talk to that many people. I've often heard Amy talk about all these people that reach out to her and stuff like that. Like, nobody really reaches out to me. I only know a couple of people in town. but from what
You're so lucky.
well,
I was
don't-
like that for years.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm like flying under the radar. Maybe I'm not that much of a social person, but regardless, the few people that I have talked to have said, one, that the optics doesn't look good. And these are people that have been around for a while. No one on any elected boards or anything, developers, because I do talk to some of them and some of the people that do the engineering work for some of the developers, whatever. Like, those are the people, and it's only like a business kind of a relationship. It's not like they're my friends, but I do hear some things going on about the optics and yes, how that looks and how that will present at town meeting. But I honestly don't know that much about it, and it may sound like I'm using like my newness to the town as like an excuse sometimes, but I just don't know how people's vibe is around here. I mean, I can tell you that the last year, with the transition of the new building inspector and with what I've seen on the planning board, things are certainly different. And I'm not saying the old way was better. I'm saying things are different. And I understand the creation of this, and we want to implement. I was around I went to a lot of those, master plan the master planning stuff and the public forums, and I saw the maps, and I also was like, whoa, this is kind of shocking to me, coming from a more civilized community, it was a bit shocking to me. And I don't mean civilized, I just mean like the way other towns are developed and such. So with all that being said, I don't really get too much feedback, but the feedback I have got is that the optics don't look good. And as a non-voting member,
And that the optics is coming from fellow developers, I guess is what you're saying? Is that-
yeah, that's the ones that I've heard of. Yeah, heard from. Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
heard
they're
a lot
also
of
residents of the town and have been, for years,
that voice about from developers and engineers, Paul, I thought was more related to the single lot exemption amendment, not so much these. So that's interesting to hear that perspective. I'm just wondering if like the scare tactic from the opposition voice is purely just a scare tactic. And I just feel like we've done so much work. I don't want to rush things to get us a special town meeting and then this fall flat. So I don't know how strong the optics are and how it really impacts things. I just wanted to think through it.
Our little internal fight, the cat fight we're having right now, didn't seem to have any influence on the select board or the advisory committee.
Right.
Yeah. The one vote against it on the advisory committee that I understood, and I was doing two meetings at once, I'll admit to it. I was listening to it on my phone. The guy who voted against the warrant article on the advisory had his own reasons for doing it. I don't think he was influenced by anything. He had his own reasons, and none of them surprised me. But I would caution listening to the developer community too much. Our town has a certain reputation of being easy and changing things and perceiving that we're tightening up bylaws and changing things and maybe making more hoops to jump through. Of course, they're going to oppose it because Cohasset's a big lots, big money involved in transactions here. And if it makes it harder, it cuts into the bottom line. And we have a perception as sometimes, other than our zoning board, by the way, of being a rather easy town.
Mm-hmm.
To develop in.
I wish there were more people talking to me. I don't want to always talk to
No,
but I don't have anyone else really talking to me. I wish I had more to report,
Yeah.
And
Okay, we're all representatives of slightly different social groups and whatever, so.
I'm literally not.
Put them all together, we
Maybe
probably
the-
represent the town.
All the time I spend in Cohasset is with you guys on this computer. You know what I mean?
Oh,
You need to get-
that's
Oh, Paul.
sweet. Oh,
Actually, that's
no,
good.
I got my heart.
Yeah, and I think about what
Touched.
just happened in Situate where select board and conservation said no to buying the Border Street parcels. Advisory said yes, and at town meeting, the vote was yes. So there you kind of have a difference of board's opinions and votes. So it's just something, an example.
Are you saying they may have more of a history of that divided
I'm just saying
boards
that the
or-
boards were not
or
all
opposite?
aligned, right?
Yeah,
Concom and select board voted no to buy those parcels and advisory voted yes.
And CBC obviously voted yes.
And CPC obviously. And the town voted yes.
I
So that-
didn't know that. I'm glad to hear it.
We have a consensus through the master plan process and a consensus that we continue to hear on the planning board from some abutters on different projects. The problem is with most things, it's only the opponents who show up to voice their opinions to try to.
So I
shoot
was just gonna
something
say that
down.
it's really all about getting
And
the right people to show up. That's it.
Right, well, no, it's not. It's just, it's not just the right people showing up. It's as the Situate vote that the silent majority of the town wants something done a certain way, and it's not surprising, and it's not surprising in this town either, that boards are often very out of touch with what the actual larger population thinks, because they don't show up at every meeting. They don't voice their opinions very often. We have the strength, though, through this master plan process of knowing and having a good sense of what the town's opinions are on certain subjects. And by the way, they're consistent to the master plan process from 2000 to 2004. We got a lot of the same sentiments from people, just not as much, I think of as a majority as we do today. So again, I'm not worried about this. I just want to make sure that what we have on the 17th, we as a group think is ready to go to be presented. I perfectly expect, though, that we'll continue it, because we will get some input from members of the planning board that we will find useful.
I guess one perception thing I just want to be clear on, like this rules and regulations are the purview of planning board, not our working group. And while I'm happy to assist, and Tom, you personally and the planning board in getting something to a point that's ready to be discussed, ultimately, I'm a little bit concerned about being told that we overstep the mark by working on rules and regulations for the planning board, because this truly is not our purview.
I'll correct that by saying that, like I said to the planning board last night, the actual process is, because we don't have the time to do this and haven't had the time in 30 years to do what we're doing. The zoning working group and the master plan implementation committee were essentially set up as subcommittees to get into the weeds and do all the hard work that needs to do in rewriting a bylaw. Part of that rewrite process that we've already discussed and agreed upon is moving a lot of stuff out of the bylaw that doesn't need to be there into regulations. So the regulations take their authority from the bylaw, and I perfectly within our purview to suggest them. And that's all we are doing in the end, is suggesting, and it is up to the five of us to vote on.
Yeah, and I just again, I think that us perfecting this too much, I guess where I'm headed, Tom, is that us perfecting this too much doesn't help us in the long run, because ultimately it's the planning board's will on this one. And I think if we get it too perfect, it's going to be a case of no good deed goes unpunished. Because
all right, well, let's put in the edits we did today. Carolyn answered a very important question before she left, because it is the upgrade process, which is not going to be a given in every situation, but I know that's going to be the concern of some of our members, and she's answered that question, and we go with that.
Okay, then, and again, if there's specific comments that they want the working group to work on after those public hearings, that's fine. But I do ultimately think that it's the planning board that really has to weigh in on this.
Yeah, okay, agreed.
So Tom, I've got the working copy here. I'll create a nice little table for you in that one section that needs a clean table. And then I think the biggest thing is to get that meeting with Brian Joyce to really scrub under section 4, the descriptions of roadway surface and roadway foundation in the non-subdivision ways, in contrast to what we already have for common driveways, to make sure we get that right.
Yep, I'll try to work on that. I'll send an email out right now just to remind Lauren. And
Paul's got his hand up.
Yep. What's up, Paul?
So I didn't want to interrupt you guys. Sorry, I was going to wait till you were done. Are you guys good? I just curious. So with what Cassie had mentioned, in terms of like Woody, do you think that the optics don't look good? And do you think that we should wait till spring? Because,
No, I think we should go ahead. I think that we need to but we need to pay very close attention to every concern that's brought up and address it in some succinct fashion, as Katie is doing really in the last couple of presentations, skipping some of the overture and really getting right into why are we doing this, primarily to bring our bylaws into conformance with state law.
Yeah, no, I mean,
And I think if people can understand the simplicity of that, you know, and that we're not out to rob private landowners of their rights, you know, that kind of thing.
Katie, you
But there are a
agree,
lot of misunderstandings that have come up.
Katie, you agree we should go forward?
I do. I think that
And when I
now
say
that
go forward, I mean now versus spring.
with the two articles that have already gone through the process to date, yes,
Yeah.
I think we should go forward. I think that we have a majority vote in a very positive way from advisory, and I think we're going to have a unanimous vote from select board on Tuesday. And I think that, along with, you know, again, a 4-1 and a 5-0 from planning board, sends a pretty clear signal around the support. I think, to be honest, Paul, and this sort of goes back to the debate that the planning board was having. I was on school committee where we were voting on policy and decisions, and once the majority view voted, that became the accepted policy, and you weren't allowed as a committee member to undermine it. Like and this was true for collective bargaining. Like, I might have disagreed on the percent that was being given to teachers in executive session or, you know, in negotiations, but like once we voted once we had a majority vote, it was the majority vote of the school committee that went forward. So I guess that's where I'm struggling with. Like, I think the only thing that kills us is if the minority voice continues to ferment concerns. And I think we'll be okay at special town meeting, to be honest, Paul, but that mechanism of the dissenting voice continuing after the vote has been taken doesn't exist on other elected boards. It certainly didn't exist for me on school committee, where like once we voted and it was split 4-1, 3-2, whatever it was, whatever the majority vote was, that was the law of the land. You know? So
It's the only way boards and committees can function. The tyranny of the minority is ridiculous.
That's
you
what I
know,
was
so,
struggling with last
and I
night.
think that the town understands that. Honestly, if votes are 4-1, 4-1, 5-1, 6-1, I mean, they're not going to spend too much time on the ones.
Yeah. So I think we're fine, but I just, for my, and again, this is my 2 cents, having been on an elected board before, you have to figure a way to come together after a vote is taken. And that's what's missing right now. And I don't think it's going to trip us up on the 2 articles for special town meeting, but I still feel very strongly that it has the ability to really make the bigger zoning redraft a bit of a nightmare.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, we've spent 2.5 hours on stuff that we have seen before or had in our hands, and on a very narrow topic. Good Lord, if we take a whole section or 3 sections of the bylaw, or it's got 22 sections, mind you, we you know, I mean, it'd be impossible. We just couldn't deal with that level of backbiting and questioning. I don't think. That's my concern, but I mean, I think we just have to find a mechanism to move on and say, I respect your disagreement, your right to vote no, but you're outvoted, and on we go.
So
I don't know, that may be wishful thinking.
Straw poll this group here just to see, like, because, you know, I guess the one thing, you know, from what I've heard is if it got denied, then we'd have to wait the 2 years. That's all.
Right.
That's really it.
Well,
But if
the whole
4 of you-
process would stop at that point, I think, Paul,
Yeah,
most
if the
likely.
4 of you are in, you know, I'm in. Clearly, I'm in. I'm here. I'm trying to help, you know.
Yeah, I know you are.
On
Yeah.
the single lot exemption thing, clearly, you know, I was against it, and now that's gone, you know, and like I understand we need change. We need to tighten things up. We need to implement some more order where maybe there wasn't so much order in the past, and, you know, So I'm about it. Like I keep showing up, I keep trying to learn, I keep trying to educate myself and get more familiar with this and,
Yeah.
you know, so
Yeah,
here I am. And I'm
I-
with you.
I think we're good for
Good,
the two
thanks.
articles. I think the broader redraft is the place that Woody and I both have expressed concerns as to how tenuous is it with a split planning board. That we have to explore further.
Yeah, I don't want to, I mean, and I know this may sound ridiculous, but I do not want to, I will not anticipate discussions, 8-hour days, day after day, weeks after weeks on this. I mean, we all have lives to lead.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to put in a lot of time, but not that kind of time. And of course, you know,
That's,
I'm not whining, but just,
but rewriting the whole bylaw is a big task. Again, Katie, I don't think, even Clark said he agreed the bylaw needed to be reviewed and updated. So I don't think it's as bad as you think, but
Okay.
we have to come up with a very sane way of how we're going to roll this out and discuss it.
Yeah.
You know, again, I'm sorry to keep referring to the draft I've written because at some point it has to be put on paper, but a lot of it doesn't change. It's just moved around and cleaned up. And I would presume, unless, like, again, I'll use parking and signs as examples. No changes are proposed, but we could sail through those, you know, but give us, it's going to be definitions in the two tables where the real changes are coming.
Yep.
And we got to just give ourselves the time and enough public forums. And I hope we can get away from Zoom. I don't know what the Elm Street forum turnouts have been like with Zoom, but you know, we're talking about a major change, and I hope we can get to people face to face at some point.
Well, I think that's what the intent is. I mean, that's why they're experimenting with us next Tuesday. So if we all show up masked on Tuesday, maybe there's a hope that
Yes.
that they'll feel comfortable at some point allowing boards to make decisions around
So
whether
do
they
you.
want to meet in person or via Zoom or flip back and forth. I think that's sort of the grand experiment in part on Tuesday. So guys, as
All
Woody
right.
said, it has been 2.5 hours. I really enjoyed working with this group. I hope we can continue to do good work. I think we have it in our grasp. It's finding that balance so that we have planning board support and we have enough input from the public. And I do think that getting to special town meeting, getting funding for a consultant that can help us with that is going to be a piece of the solution. So I'm committed to run through then.
Well said.
So with that, Tom, I will clean this up and send it back to you, and then you can distribute it to the planning board for the hearing on the 17th. I'm going to adjourn us at 3:30, and I will poll the group to set our next regular meeting after we get through the meeting on the 9th, and I'll have a little time to clear our heads.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
All
okay,
right. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
thank you all.
Good work.
Yeah.
All right. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.